Welcome back to the McGregor Angle. My name's Catherine McGregor, and joining me now is Heston Russell. And this week saw a rapid deterioration in the situation in Afghanistan, the theatre in which this great young Australian fought. Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces made substantial gains throughout the country, even launching an attack on the residence of the Defence Minister in Kabul itself. The collapse of the Afghan government seems inevitable to me, and I don't like saying that. But the deteriorating ground situation has reopened the wounds of many Afghan veterans and their loved ones. Heston Russell served with Special Operations Command in Afghanistan. He led elite commandos on dangerous missions, and for his service he was thanked by being hauled before the IGADF inquiry into allegations of war crimes in Afghanistan. He paid a grim price both mentally and emotionally for that. His own government did more damage to Heston Russell than the enemy. He joins me now to talk about a number of issues arising in the veteran space this week from our Brisbane studio. Heston, welcome.
G'day, Catherine. Great to be on. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Look, cutting to the chase, Heston, we've already had a quick chat, and I heard your compelling interview with Steve Price this week. When the announcement was made back in November by both the CDF and the Prime Minister about dark deeds and citations and gongs being stripped off people, including dead soldiers causing further harm to their families, all done with great fanfare. And yet this week we get a supplementary report in the middle of the COVID news, in the middle of the Olympics, just posted without any fanfare on Defence's website. What did you make of that?
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. As you said, slid under the door while the Olympics and COVID was on, as opposed to the grandstanding news spectacle we saw in November that literally sent shockwaves through the veteran community and veterans' families and really exposed us on a national and international scale. And what I find so ironic in this project management document that talks about cultural reforms is that the true testament of culture comes down to leadership. And where we have a document that's saying we're going to spend the next 4 years to go and embark upon a cultural reform for behaviours that are reported back at 2013 when we withdrew from Afghanistan, at the same time is talking about how we need to show some accountability and rebuild that trust. And how can we rebuild that trust when what we have seen in the veteran community and as Australians is our Chief of Defence Force and Prime Minister step up and talk about brutal truths and remove unit citations? And even back before then in July, change the letters patent so those decisions could be embarked upon. And now all of a sudden we're meant to go along with this project management document that isn't backed up by a leader coming forward and accepting responsibility and being accountable. That is one of their streams and foundations within this document. It just seems a little bit too late, too lame, and I don't understand why it has been handled in such a way.
Heston, you're deeply connected in the veteran community. What's your sit rep at the moment in terms of the well-being? You're talking to a lot of the guys and women who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. As the withdrawal process hastens, and we pulled up our shutters last week or a couple of weeks ago, is it starting to reopen wounds, or are we overstating that? Are you hearing more cries for help and more sense of futility out of the veteran community?
The cries for help essentially come in, Catherine, when people are asking this question, was it worth it? And that's the issue coming from this unceremonious withdrawal of our last 6 people from Afghanistan on the 11th of July, whereas, like we've spoken about before, we really ceased our commitment of fighting troops in 2013 and maintained some sort of advisory and administrative function since then. And what we're sort of seeing are decisions like, a 2-week consultation process to see if we need to have a national day of commemoration. We see our TV screens flooded with the Taliban taking over. We release a document that says we're going to go through a deliberate cultural reform plan that includes establishing a way in which we're going to look to compensate those Afghan families identified in the Brereton report issues. And as you've said previously, there isn't going to be an Afghan government to conduct those negotiations and those decisions with for that compensation. So there's this big, kettle brewing, and it's starting to boil over for a few people, and particularly issues like the interpreters and the embassy staff trying to get visas to come back here. There are these emotional heartstrings that are being pulled in these last-ditch efforts for some veterans to really feel some more value in answering the question of was it worth it, as opposed to what I keep trying to do is look back to when I was over there, the team I was with, the mission and the purpose we have, and 100% that was worth it. And we see that now in where we stand as an Australian society and our military forces in our coalition, through to where we stood at the end of our time in Afghanistan as a military capability. And the culture reform actually needs to address the culture that's been allowed to enter into our Defence Force leadership since then, the culture that is now on display by the actions of people like General Campbell when he stood up November last year.
Yeah.
That is the culture that needs to be addressed. We need to go back to the culture that came with having a higher purpose and a higher performance, that saw our nation supporting our veterans in their commitment to Afghanistan, let alone the commando capability with the Special Operations Task Force that deployed to Iraq since then and took the fight to Daesh, to ISIS. You know, I was over there and joined in the troops with the task force in 2016, 2017. All these gaps in between we're missing because we're going back to address media stories as opposed to what's actually happening on the ground, and we're missing the mark applying management instead of leadership to culture.
Yes, and Heston, you've got very profound objections to making the National Day of Commemoration September 11. Walk us through that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, by the way. Do you think you've made inroads with the government talking sense on that point?
Well, what we were fortunate enough to do, Catherine, as you saw, is through our organisation, Veteran Support Force, or vsf.org.au, we launched our own survey, and we had 1,100 responses just in the 1 week that we had it, asking veterans about their considerations for this National Day of Commemoration. And September 11 was resoundingly seen as being inappropriate, given it is the day that commemorates the loss of thousands of lives of US. And particularly for us, a lot of the responses that came back, other options included September 17th, when the Australian Parliament agreed to commit Australian forces to Afghanistan. But the overwhelming response were people looking at that date in October, when we sort of first had boots on the ground. There's a bit of also division in the community, where most of us do not want to have a day that sits alongside Anzac Day and Remembrance Day. Anzac Day has lost its way as far as its understanding in the public over the last decade or so, whereas those of us who know Anzac Day commemorates where the Anzac spirit and the Australian spirit was forged and carried through all those veterans who've served in conflicts since. And Remembrance Day commemorates those we've lost in all wars and conflicts. Those 2 days stand alone, signifying their importance individually and collectively for all of those who have served, who currently serve and who will serve. And a National Day of Commemoration needs to be something like Vietnam Veterans Day, that again is on the veteran calendar, is appropriately placed to commemorate one of those dates of significance to those who have been deployed, and also provides us simply with the opportunity to do what is also an antidote to a large part of this mental health crisis we're going through at the moment, to provide veterans with the opportunity to get together and connect as a community and remember that culture and those values that inspired us to higher performance with that higher purpose that was representing our country and supporting each other in combat.
Indeed. Heston, you continue to lead and inspire, and I know many in the veteran community look to you for that. Thanks for making time again tonight. I do want to get you back to look at the Royal Commission as it unfolds, and we'll speak again. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thank you for these conversations, Catherine. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.